Welcome to MyLife, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche and a freilichen Chanukah. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav HaSholem, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz Olav HaSholem, Rabbi Yoel HaKoyen Khan Olav HaSholem. And it is also in schus and merit of Rav Zev Yecheskel and Risha Katz, Le'edich Yomim V'shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. We are middle of chapter 4, the chapter that describes in full glory the role of Torah and Mitzvos in the journey of a soul in this world. So we're talking about the divine soul, which enters inside the human body, side by side with the animal soul, which will be discussed later in Tanya, and was already introduced at the end of chapter 1. And as we know, we live in this world. There are many options. A person can choose to indulge and live a life of selfishness. A person can live a life of transcendence and selflessness. Later we shall discuss, beginning in chapter 9, the battle between these two souls. But here we're concerned with, how does the divine soul manifest? So many ways you can say, as one person wrote to me, are these chapters only about a tzaddik whose divine soul dominates, as we'll learn later in Tanya? Because we're not talking here about the challenges we have. And the answer is, in one sense, yes. The tzaddik v'tevloi, the tzaddik, as we'll learn later, the divine soul dominates. But nevertheless, everybody has a divine soul. And as such, these chapters are critical because the first thing you need to do, and you need to know and do in anything in life, is to establish what are you made of, what makes you tick. So the Alter Rebbe is explaining in elaborate detail what makes us tick on the divine side, so we should know that we have a fighting chance. Much more than that, as we'll learn later, to live in this world. And when you access the divine soul, what's happening is that we have the Torah and Mitzvos as a gift given to us in this world that allows us to manifest the divinity of the soul through our thought, speech, and action. And this is vital, because if the divine soul remained in a more dormant state, or even if it's active, but it doesn't really completely encompass the human being, then it's not accomplishing the ultimate goal. That is why it's critical that not just the divine soul be divine, as we learned in chapter 2, and not just the faculties. I say just, it's not a just, but I mean to say in addition to. In chapter 3, the faculties of the divine soul, which is the mind and the emotions, are consumed with godliness, contemplating on God and feeling, emotionally emoting with godliness. But it actually comes into thought, speech, and action in a real actionable way in this world. And what is the thought, speech, and action? You have what to connect with. It's not like the only thought, speech, and action is the material things in this world. No. The Torah and Mitzvos was given in a way that thought, speech, and action can be malbish, as a lavush, garments that dress the person with Torah and Mitzvos. So God's desire, Rotzen and Chachmose, Rotzeinu v'Chachmose, God's desire and wisdom now has become a viable and a very tangible reality in this world. If the Torah remained a spiritual entity in the heavens, and we have a very negligible or very difficult and tenuous relationship with it, then it would be back to the problem that fine, you have a divinity within you, but how do you actualize it? The fact that the Torah traveled, Nosa v'Yarda, as we learned, it traveled, and it manifests itself in a structure that we can identify with and we can actually embrace through our thought, speech, and action. So now we have the interface. The Torah Mitzvos is Leiba Shamayim. It's not in heaven. It's down by here, like the water that descends, like you said, just like water comes down from higher to lower, and water here is actual water. It's not just a glimpse or a taste of the water. The exact water has come down below. Torah Nimshal L'Maya, Torah is compared to this water. So through this water, we're able to sustain and nourish and nurture ourselves. As we learned in the previous classes, to just use the words of the Alter Rebbe that we learned, that once now the Torah, which is Chachmasi v'Ritzeinu shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Araisa v'Kutshabrichu kul echad, the Torah and God are one. And that Torah, as it's one with God, has come down, that even though the Eibishter is himself on his own, is Ein Sof l'Gdulosei, Ein Cheker, V'les Machshava Tfisa Beklal, no thought can grasp him, as we learned all the different details that the Alter Rebbe says about this. Nevertheless, in the place of his greatness is the place of his humility. He's packaged, so to speak, his Ein Sof, his infinity, he's packaged in Torah and Mitzvos, and through Torah and Mitzvos, Simsim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ritzeinu v'Chachmosei, B'Tayag Mitzvos HaTorah B'Hilchasein, because the Mitzvos are actually numbered. Tayag, there's 613 Mitzvos, which means that they're in a world of substance where we can count them, and they have individuality and they have identity. And as well as B'Tzirufe Asius, not just that the Mitzvos have structure, but it comes even actual letters and words of Tanakh, Midrashei Seyin, Shabbat Godesh, and Midrashei Chazal, in order for what? So the neshama, or the ruach, or the nefesh, and the gufa odam. That's the key here. Because we're not talking about in heaven. The gufa odam down below, tuchal la'asigon b'daito l'kaim and kol masha efshel l'kaim mehem b'maisa dibur machshava. That the soul should be able to understand them, understand what the Torah, and perform them. With the seichel ha'odam, with the intelligence, the low, I should say seichel the nefesh l'kis, and also perform them, the kaimon, kol ma she'efshel l'kaim b'maisa dibur machshava. And what happens through that? That here now we have a full relationship with God. V'ayidei zeh tislabish b'chol eser b'chineseh b'shleish levushim elu. And thereby dresses up all the 10 faculties of the soul, are now dressed up in these garments of action, speech, and thought, to become totally one with what? With the Torah, as it is above, is now we're able to manifest it and live a divine life. And that's when he continues to say, L'chein nimshlan, that's why Torah is compared to water, as I just described. Because just as water comes from a higher place down below, so too the Torah Yodim became kfeda, shiritzeinu v'chachmos yisbarach. And again, why is he repeating that? Because that's the whole point. We want the Torah as it is above, like water. When it comes below, it's the same water as it was above. So it retains, in the full sense of the word, its connection to the divine. That he's saying that even when it comes down, it doesn't lose that transcendent, and you can even say beyond structure power, that no thought can grasp it at all, because it's the water. It's that water that no thought can grasp at all above has now come down below. Umisham nosa v'yarda, and from there it traveled downward, or journeyed downward. V'yarda b'seisera madreges, through the hidden places in the steps. That's the expression. Why is he saying that? Because he wants the Torah to have both sides. That it both comes from a place of the hidden steps, from the hidden dimensions, all the way from above, and at the same time it comes downward. So the Alter Rebbe is literally depicting in a vivid way the journey of the Torah. The Rebbe emphasizes when it says Nasa, it's like a journey away from somewhere. Why? Because when the Torah comes down, it belongs here. Torah le b'shamayim, the Torah does not remain in heaven. Even though in heaven there is an element of Torah, Neshamis in heaven learn Torah, and we're soon going to learn about that. But the main place where is the Etzem HaTorah, Where do you have the essence of the Torah? Down below. As we discussed, that was the whole point of Matan Torah. Down below. Torah Lebe Shemaimi. Halachas are determined down below. Bishtalshus ha'elamis. And comes down unaffected, just like water, as it travels downward. Ad shenislapsha b'dvarim gashmim v'inyoni elam hazeh. To the point where God's will and Chochmah is dressed up, enclosed in physical objects and worldly concepts. So the Alter Rebbe now is adding more than what he said earlier. Before he said primarily in Tayag Mitzvos HaTeirah and 613 mitzvahs and their laws, and the Tzurufa Asius, which is the combination of letters that create words, the actual texts of Tanakh. Now he wants to make it even stronger. Now that we're talking about like water, he's making it even stronger. He's adding that it's Nislapsha B'dvarim Gashmim. In physical matters, V'inyoni Elam Hazeh. And in concepts and worldly concepts that we can relate to when you open up a Gemara. Or let's start with Tanakh. When you open up a Chumash, it's talking about things that are very tangible. People that live, the narratives, the mitzvahs, the travels, the journeys, those are all tangible things in this world. But it's Torah. It's Chachmas Yisrael Yisbarach. Chachmas Yisbarach. And it's Seini Yisbarach. A Torah that is one with God. That and less machshava tfisa beklal. The very Torah that says no thought can grasp it, that itself God manifested in a way a thought that can grasp it, as we'll be learning. So through our concentration, we're able to grasp the divine through Torah mitzvahs. Shehin reiv mitzvahs ha-Torah kekulam v'hilchasein. But this is because the reiv mitzvahs ha-Torah are physical matters. And their laws of the Torah are about physical matters. Why does it say reiv mitzvahs ha-Torah? Because there are mitzvahs that are not tangible. Let's say a mitzvah like Avos Hashem, loving God. Avos Yisrael, Yiras Hashem. These are not mitzvahs you could say dvarim gashmim. But the Rebbe emphasizes, he says v'hilchesein. Because even though the mitzvah itself may be sublime, it's not like putting on tefillin with actually physical straps. Or eating kosher, which is a physical act of food. Or other such physical mitzvahs. Even the mitzvahs that are more spiritual, so to speak, and more ethereal, the hilchesein do also translate in physical ways. Like Avos Yisrael includes helping someone with clothing, with food, with inviting them to a meal. These are tangible physical things. So the hilchesein comes to emphasize that even those mitzvahs also have an element of gashmin. Because remember, we want to bring the Torah as much as possible into our practical and material lives. Not that we have to leave this world in order to keep Torah, but that in Torah you can integrate, you can engage with the world and turn it into a world that completely gets encompassed, all three garments of the individual, with God's Chochmah and Ratzon. That's the key point here. So the neshama alone, just to reiterate a point we've made a number of times, is a divine soul, chelik elikam emal mamish. But that remains in a concealed way, in a concealed state. Torah mitzvahs brings it alive that your life, your very life, your thought, speech, and action, every given moment, is a garment to Torah mitzvahs, to the faculties that you have. So in effect, all of you is essentially a walking example, or you can say a living, walking manifestation of the divine will and the divine wisdom. And then he adds again, so even though most of the mitzvahs are physical, but since most, you say Rubei Kekulam, which means that most of them, and therefore it's considered like all of them. And even those that are not, like we just said, still have physical manifestation in some way. And now again, he brings back the second point. Not just there's the mitzvahs, and they manifest in physical matter, physical objects, and in worldly concepts, but also b'tzirufe esius gashmias b'diyei ala sefer, Before he said Tzirufei Eisi is Tanakh. Now he wants to bring it down again in a very physical way. The water has come down below, the water of Torah. So it's also, B'tzirufei Eisi is Gashmias, B'diel HaSefer, as well as it's sacred as the texts. Tzirufei Eisi is the combination of letters. It's critical to point that out because the Torah isn't just ideas. Tzirufei Eisi is actual words, Bereshis, Bara, Elokim, made up of letters with a distinct structure, all to emphasize the Torah's involvement and the Torah's manifestation as it travels downward in dressing itself up in the language, in the expressions, in the experience of the human being, in the human condition. So Tzirufei Eisi, if the Torah, for example, remained very ethereal, you didn't have it in book, letters and words in a book, it'd be lacking that connection to us in this world. And the whole point here is to make it connected, that we connect to godliness in this world. So B'tzirufei Eisi again, but now he says Gashmis, physical letters. Physical form. B'tzirufei Eisi, B'diel HaSefer, ink on parchment. When you write a Sefer Torah, you have to take physical ink, you use physical parchment, and you turn the mundane ink and parchment into something holy, called the Torah. So the Torah has now come down into physical ink and parchment, symbolizing this whole point. And where do we see that? Well, these are the books of Torah, Torah Shebiksav. The Ela Sefer Esrim V'Arba Sfarim Shebetera Neviim V'Ksuvim. In the 24 books of the Tanakh, the 5 books of Torah, and the other books in the Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Tanakh. This is the written Torah. Torah Shebal Peh is, as its name suggests, is not suggested, states openly, is about oral interpretation. Later it would be written down. And he mentioned it before, Drashei Seim, Shabbat Godus, and Midrashei Chazal. But now he's talking about the written Torah. The written Torah is literally, because you can argue the written Torah is such a holy, sacred thing. Why is it being written down? First, the engraved letters and the Ten Commandments, Seres HaDibros in the tablets, literally engraved letters, and then a Sefer Torah, as Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Sefer Torah, and then in every generation, that's coming ink on parchment. That's what constitutes the 24 holy books of Tanakh. In addition, again, why is he emphasizing 24? Because like before with the Mitzvos, he wants to show it's coming down into real structure. It's not just God's general, you could say, amorphous desire and will and wisdom. But it comes down to 24 actual books, written ink on parchment. Torah, Nevi'im, V'Ksuvim. Why is all of this the case? Kedei, in order, shetehei kol machshava tfisa behen. Listen to the words. He just said, less machshava tfisa beklal. No thought can grasp him. Why can't no thought grasp him? Because we're human beings, created entities, mortals. How could a mortal, a created entity, grasp the thought of the Creator, as we learned earlier? But that's only, we can't do it on our own, but the Eibishter gave himself to us, so to speak. He manifested himself in Torah. No nafshik sovis yehovis. I have written myself, engraved myself in these words and these letters. It's not our words and letters. So now, this las machshava tfisa beklal, this is the divine entity that's completely beyond. Now, through traveling downward like the water and traveling all the way down, madrega, one level after another, manifested itself in that way kedei, in order shetei kol machshava tfisa behem, that every mind, kol machshava, it's a strong statement, not just some minds, every mind should be able to grasp them. Because everybody, whether it's a child or an adult or an educated person or less educated, can read these letters, can read Tanakh. And to add what the Shalosh says that even if a person doesn't understand what he says, he can just read the names of the parshas. There's already a mitzvah of learning Torah. Birchas HaTorah you make in Torah Shebiksav, even lo yoda makomad, even if you don't understand what it says. Why? Because the Torah has come into these words, and you're saying the words. Understanding, obviously, is the complete experience. Now the Alter Rebbe is not stating that. I'm just pointing out that by saying it, everybody has the ability to learn Torah. Now he's talking about machshava tfisa behen, that every thought, every mind can grasp it, because even a simple child could also understand something in the Torah. So what I just said was really not what the Alter Rebbe is saying. I just wanted to point out that the Torah is accessible to all. But here he's saying they should take kol machshava tfisa behen, that every thought can grasp these Torah mitzvahs, and through that you're grasping the Eibishter, Araisa v'kutche brichu kul echad, the God who's one with the Torah. You're grasping that which is ungraspable. Yes. Then he goes further. V'afilu b'chinas dibur u'maisa shalamata med madregas machshava. He's talking even further, and even the second lower garments. We're talking now speech and action. This is machshava. Remember, it's all about the expression through the garments, thought, speech, and action. So now he says, and even the garments of speech and action. They're lower then, because they're more external. Machshava is an inner thought, things that in your thought you may not be able to express in words, and definitely not in action. But here he's saying that even speech and action, which are lower state than thought, tfisa behen u'mislabeshes behen, that they should also be able to grasp them and dress in them. In what? In the Torah mitzvahs. Because the Torah mitzvahs have now come down to a level, like we said, to repeat, into dvarim gashmim, physical things, and in yoni elam hazeh, and worldly concepts, and worldly matters, because that's what Torah mitzvahs is involved in, worldly matters. You take cloth, you take parchment, that you for tefillin or mezuzah or sefer Torah, tzemer, wool for tzitzis. Mitzvahs rubam, as you said, are about physical objects, and you're turning them into godly mitzvahs. So as a result of that, and the second thing, that also comes in these letters and these words of the texts of Tanakh. All kidei, that every thought should be able to grasp them, and even dibur u'maisa, which just makes it even more accessible. Because some people, you could say, don't have the high level of thought, or they have a very superficial level of thought. But everybody, dibur u'maisa, shlemayim tfisa behen mislabeshes behen, should be able to grasp them and dress up in them. When we speak, like we said earlier, in the beginning of the chapter, he spoke about that the dibur, where a person speaks, esig b'pirush kol tayag mitzvahs, v'hilchasein, and maisa mitzvahs maisis, actual mitzvahs, because again, the dvarim gashmi, the physical mitzvahs, are actionable. So now also dibur and machshava should be able to grasp the divine. So when a person thought, you could say, okay, thought is a more sublime experience. You're learning Torah, your mind bonds and connects with the divine mind. But an action is just an action, but it's a mitzvah. You're performing God's mitzvah. So when you perform it, you are now manifesting the garment of Maisa, the godliness that is beyond general human grasp. Okay. And now he concludes and ties it all together. Uma'achar Shateiru mitzvaseh malbishim kol eser b'chinos hanefesh. And now, since the Torah and its mitzvahs provide the clothing, the garments, and they dress up all the 10 faculties. Remember, the faculties are like the body. Garments we dress the body in garments. Now that Torah mitzvahs are manifesting through machshava, dibur, and maisa, thought, speech, and action, they're in clothing and dressing up all the 10 faculties of the soul. So since the Torah is doing that, v'chol taryag evoreha mereshav ad ragla. So Torah and Mitzvos is dressing up all the 10 faculties. And the Torah and Mitzvos, Malbishon Kol Eser B'chinas HaNefesh, V'Kol Tayage V'Reah, Mereisha V'Adragla, and all the souls, 613 components. Remember we spoke about, just like the body has 613, 248 and 365, 248 limbs and 365 nerves, so the same thing, the soul has 613 components. What's the emphasis? Because remember, the Alter Rebbe wants us to be completely encompassed, not just a part of you, all of you, from head to foot, from the head ad ragla. Because each one of them, each limb, each organ, each part of the human body corresponds to and dresses up one of the mitzvahs. So now it's the mitzvahs are completely encompassing the person. So the Alter Rebbe says, what happens then? Harikula tzrura b'tzrei rachayim es Hashem. Es Hashem mamish, I should add. So now, let's go back to the beginning, and since the Torah, Uma'acher Sha'Torah, what's the conclusion of the Ma'acher? Since the Torah and the Mitzvahs dress up and clothe all the faculties, and all the Torah, Yagevera, the whole body of all the entire thing from beginning from head to toe, so that therefore it concludes, it follows Harikula, that through all this dressing and all the clothing of the soul, it becomes completely bound in the bundle of life with God, with Hashem. So the word tzrura, b'tzrei rachayim, which comes from Shmuel Aleph, 25:29, Chafei Chavtes. So there he talks about it as an Elam Haba, that the soul gets bound with God as it leaves this world. But the Alter Rebbe is teaching, know how it is in this world. That through this activity, where we're completely encompassed with the Torah and Mitzvahs, you get completely, it follows that the soul becomes completely bound in the bundle of life with God. And he adds the word mamish, literally. We used already the word mamish earlier, chelik alekam mal mamish, but there it was that the soul is literally a piece of godliness. Here, he's talking about that the person gets literally completely surrounded. So Torah and Mitzvahs, think of it, if you cover your head to toe, your entire body with a garment, that garment is completely encompassing you. In this case, what are the garments? Thought, speech, and action of Torah Mitzvahs. And what is it doing when you are thinking, speaking, and acting with Torah Mitzvahs? You're becoming completely encompassed. All your faculties and all your 613 limbs and organs, everything is encompassed with what? With Torah Mitzvahs. And this goes back to what he said before, and that's why the Levushim are infinitely higher than the neshama, because that's what they accomplish. They have now surrounded you, and in completely, what he says, bound. It's an interesting word. You're bound with godliness in a revealed way. That's what Torah Mitzvahs does for the Nefesh Alikis. So we will stop here. Perek Dalet, TanyaApplied.com. You can find this program and all previous programs, and also submit your questions. A gute Woche again, and a freiliche Chanukah.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.